93, 93, 93. Just gonna set up a couple levels here. And we'll get straight to it. All right, all right, all right. Welcome to the live stream. It's about 5:30 in the desert. And today we're going to speak on advancing your lingo, part 2. 93, Morbid Clown. Salute to you. So if you may have missed part 1, essentially we were speaking about being able to distinguish yourself by speaking your own original language. Because when it comes to the occult, honestly, all it is a language. If you strip away all of the madness, what you're left with is a language. And this language has an effect on your psyche. Because this language also has symbols, like every other language. Every language contains letters, and those letters are symbols. So the occult language is no different. It is full of symbols from all around the planet, from all different time periods. This is what makes it a universal language, because we're not just dealing with one culture or one tradition, we are dealing with all culture and all tradition. So, taking things a step further, the occult language allows you to see things in an original way, to have an original point of view. Because we all, you can say, use English, but we all use English in a different way. Well, we should strive to use it in a different way, because it has that ability. Now, we could speak the common tongue, which is being able to relate to most people, the common tongue. But we also have the ability to speak with a so-called forked tongue. Of course, that has a mostly negative history, because of course a forked tongue takes you to a serpent or a snake, which then kind of makes you think that, okay, speaking lies, so on and so forth. Yes, we can look at it that way if we choose to take it on face value. But if we choose to dig a little deeper, speaking with a forked tongue is the same as saying being able to speak to anyone about anything at any time. You're able to move in multiple directions. You are not limited to one path, one tradition, one religion. So you become very swift and changeable. Language allows us to do that, because although you can say we all speak English, there are many variations, many subsets of English that we call slang or ebonics, things of this nature, legalese. It is all contained within the English language, but there are various forms. So because we have an entire language, which gives us new words and new ways of saying old things, this is what allows us to place ourselves in different dimensions, because it is done through sound. What's up, Oshun? Sound generates reality. Every time we speak, we produce a sound. Even when we don't speak, we produce sounds called thoughts. So your thoughts and your words produce a vibration, produce a sound. As we know, all sound is not audible by the ear. We can only hear from a certain range, from about 20 hertz to essentially 20,000 hertz, which would be kilohertz. So anything above or below that range would not be audible to us. But that does not mean that the sound is not occurring. The sound is just not audible. So if we keep going up and up and up and up, eventually we'll get to the frequency of thought. which is way beyond our audible range. So, this is what makes thought so important. Because every time you think, you produce a sound, and that sound reverberates. The more you think, the more it reverberates. This reverberation doesn't necessarily have an effect on other people's consciousness, but it has an effect on your consciousness, first and foremost. So you are in turn producing sound that alters your consciousness. This is what thought does. Thought is different from consciousness. Once we understand that thought is different than consciousness, they are two different frequencies. However, it is all sound at the end of the day. So the common denominator is sound. So if we go back to the actual spoken word, our ability to produce audible sound, now we must study the voice. As we know, the voice can go into many tones, many ranges, many octaves. And they all produce a certain effect, some favorable and others not so favorable. Somebody yelling in your ear may not be favorable, but someone whispering in your ear may be a little more favorable. The only difference is the frequency. However, the common denominator is the sound itself, which we can say is the vibration. The vibration is a common denominator, but the difference is in the frequency. The vibration, you can say, is the beat. Like your heartbeat. Your heartbeat produces a vibration. And then everything else produces frequencies around this vibration. You can also say your consciousness is the vibration, and everything else is the frequencies that come from that vibration. Both of those things would be true. If we are to consider ourselves occultists or any type of magical worker, someone who works with inaudible or invisible forces, which is just sound. So we're just taking away all the mystifying elements of what we're actually doing here. So we don't have to put any extras on magic. We don't have to make it more than what it is. Because that's just the surface. The surface can be whatever you want it to be. It's not till you peel back the layers that you see the essence of a thing. For example, what we actually see, you can say the human body, that is a projection of the various atoms that have binded together. But you don't see the atoms, you only see the projection that the atoms produce. So everything that we see is a projection of what actually is. So the whole purpose or focus of what we would call working with invisible or inaudible or intangible forces is a matter of coming to the realization that just because sound is inaudible, it is present, which is also what we call spirit. When we say spirit is omnipresent, well, that omnipresence of spirit has to do with sound. So that must mean there is a sound that is universal. And this is why part of the video is titled Universal Laws. So when a person says that they're tapping into themselves or tapping into nature, what they're really saying is they're adjusting or adapting their consciousness to be able to tune into inaudible sound that is ever present. We're just making the decision to become aware of this ever-present sound or music, you can say. You can say there is music everywhere at all times. You can say music is a universal language. Music is always in effect. It's just that the music is inaudible. But some people can hear this music and capture this music, and this is what produces the audible music that we hear. Someone is able to perceive the inaudible and they translate it into audible sound. It's simply a translation or a transmutation from one state to another state. So it takes us right back to the basics of mathematics, science, chemistry, biology. Because we tend not to want to associate the two with each other, spirituality and science. We don't really see scientists speaking to spiritualists, and we don't really see spiritualists talking to scientists, because we have been made to believe that we are different. Instead of trying to find the common denominators between the spirit and the scientific. Because how can there be a difference or a separation? There really isn't. If we peel back all the layers, there really isn't a difference. The only difference is the language. So what we call dark energy, someone else calls chi. Speaking about the same thing, it's just a different language, a different word. But that word takes you back to a essence that is universal. So anything spiritual, it is simply becoming aware of the music that is ever present. And once you become aware of this music, what are the effects? It tends to calm you down. It tends to relax you. It tends to make you feel oneness. And so on and so forth. When you tune into this universal sound, it has a certain effect. So everything we're talking about, meditation, nirvana, all these Eastern words, the Western counterpart of this is just attunement to invisible or inaudible sound or music, which would then have a, you can say, benevolent effect on your consciousness. It will make you feel closer to your God or the Godhead or yourself. It's all based on how you have wired your own consciousness. It all depends on what worlds you are able to tune into. So going to the universal laws, because I always say memory will save you. Well, it's not that I always say this. What am I talking about? I don't always say this. This is my first time saying it probably. I know I always speak about memory, but let me say what I was going to say. Memory will save you when you have nothing else. When everything else has been depleted, the only thing you're going to be able to rely on is what you actually remember. In other words, it's very easy to remember, you can say, traumatic experiences, negative experiences. It takes no effort because that energy is always lingering in the subconscious. It takes no effort for a person to relive negative situations or thoughts. But when it comes to the memory and being able to remember, you can say, the language, the occult language, the symbolisms, and the effects they have. That's what's really going to determine whether you have a positive or negative experience at all, which is a point of learning. And not just learning something, memorizing it so that you always have access to it. Because if you can't remember it, you can't access it. If you find yourself in a situation where you can't remember, you can say, the code to a lock, you're not going to be able to open that lock. Or if you don't have the key to that lock, if you don't have the key to that door, you're not going to be able to open that door. You can't have half the code. It has to be 100% correct. And the only way to be 100% correct is to know it by heart. You have to be able to pull it from within you at the appropriate time. So when you find yourself in peculiar situations, or you want to place yourself in peculiar situations, you know how to do so because you have it all memorized. You know what to do, when to do it, and what effects are produced by it, because you are experimenting with these things in real time, because you realize this is a living language. You treat it as a living language. If it's a living language, that means all of these things actually have an effect on your consciousness. These things are not just things to know, and they have no actual effect in 3D. It doesn't have a direct effect on 3D. It has an indirect effect on 3D. meaning it has to go through your consciousness in order for change to occur. Meaning the symbol itself, just written on a piece of paper, isn't going to do much unless you know what you're doing with that paper. It is your consciousness that activates it. The reason we know this is because of the double slit experiment, which is just simply, if you are observing a thing, the result will be different if you were not observing that thing. The result is based on observation. And we know every time you open your eyes and utilize your iris, you are collapsing waves into particles. Because when you are not observing a thing, it is in a wave form. Meaning anything can be anywhere. Nothing has a definite point. The only time we have definites is when you are observing it with your consciousness. That's the only thing that makes a thing definite. Hence why you would want to have these things in your memory, because that's the only thing that's going to make it definite. It doesn't become definite on the paper. Eventually, the 2D has to become 3D. And the only way for the 2D to become 3D, which is basically giving it life, the only way to give this language life and make it living is to first know exactly what it is that each thing does. So now you're not just speaking the language haphazardly. You're going based off of actual experience. You are coming from within instead of without. Which then takes me to the universal laws. You can say we all are aware that we have universal laws. But if you ask somebody, okay, well, what are the 7 universal laws? If you ask them to quote, how many people can actually quote all 7? Just from memory. We're not talking about doing a Google search. That would be an example of without. Google is very convenient when you don't have something in your memory. But if you have something in your memory, you know that you will never need to access Google. Because you know exactly where it is or what it means. There is no need. You can come from your internal temple. You can come from the etheric, which is more powerful than Google. This is the whole point. Google is a very powerful tool. But what's even more powerful than Google is your own internal essence, your own self, your own ability to come to new conclusions that don't exist on Google yet. You may be the one to put it on Google. The only way to come to those conclusions is it has to come from the internal. You have to know it from within. Because once you know it from within, all of the tools are easy. Everything becomes effortless. If you know planets and zodiacs, you can pull up a chart and you know exactly what everything is. You can pull out a tarot deck and know exactly what every card represents. You can pull out a tree of life. You can pull out a Kabbalah and know exactly what each of these 22 points or 22 paths represents, and you know what each of these 10 sephira represent. So you literally have the whole game on lock just by knowing these things by heart. You just are learning how to utilize them in different ways. This is the process of turning the 2D into the 3D so that you become the tree of life. You come to the realization, oh, this whole time what I've been doing is exploring my own self. This is why it's called the knowledge of self. You are exploring the contents of your own consciousness. This is how you make it living. And this has to be done with your own effort, with your own memory. Not your mind, your memory. Because if you can't access it with the mind if it's not in your memory. The mind, you can say, is what takes it further. The mind is what allows you to ponder on it. The mind is what allows you to dig deep and to come to your own conclusions. But the mind can't even begin to operate without it being in your memory. This is why people use Google. Because they can't access their mind if it's not in their memory. Because if it's in your memory, then you can access your mind. For example, if you know exactly where a person lives by heart, you don't need to be told how to get there. You know there's many different ways to get there. Your mind, when you access your mind just determines, okay, well, how am I going to get there? I can take this route, this route, this route, this route. So your mind can activate if it's already in your memory. But your mind cannot activate if it's not in your memory. And this is why we access Google. Whether we're pulling up Google Maps or utilizing Google to see what type of information that we can dig into. Trying to seek definitions and explain things that we may not have the answers to. See, Google is a great tool. It's just not to be relied on. Google is good to help introduce you to things you don't know. But once you know those things, Google is no longer necessary. Google cannot take you to the next level of a thing. It cannot take you to the essence of a thing. That is only possible by utilizing your mind, which is universal. The mind is not stationary. The mind is universal, meaning the entirety of your consciousness. The mind has access to the entirety of your consciousness, which you can say is the 12 houses of astrology, if you want to break it down that way. Your mind has access to all 12 of your houses, all 12 of your constellations, all 10 of your planets, all 22 of your points. The mind has access to it all. However, it needs to be directed. You need to tell it where to go. And once you are able to give it direction, then it can perform its magic. So I use the example of the universal laws. It's because essentially you can say this should be everybody's foundation. We should all be able to agree on the universal laws. We don't have to necessarily agree when it comes to religion, tradition, spirituality, identity, individuality. All those things will be up to your own personal consciousness. However, we should all be able to agree on the universal laws. So if that is, you can say, the one thing that we all can agree upon, it may not be anything else. Everything else becomes up to your preference. But when it comes to the foundation of it all, If it's not the universal laws, then what would it be? Because through the universal laws do we understand the language of the occult. Because the universal laws provide us with the field of consciousness that the language plays out in. So you can say the universal laws provide us with a map in which we are operating or performing our strategy upon, that we are performing our experiments on. So we don't have an idea about the map. We may have the language, but you see, we may not know exactly what to do with it, which is what we see now. There's a lot of people that have all this knowledge, but just because you have knowledge, that doesn't make you wise. In order to become wise, you need to experiment with the knowledge. The knowledge has to eventually become 3D. It has to essentially become living from within you. You are now giving it life from your own essence. Meaning you become the example of why the universal laws are accurate or why the law of attraction works. They're going to know that it's real because of what you do, not because of a book they read. You see the difference between 2D and 3D? What are you going to listen to? Are you going to pick up a book before actually listening to someone's actual testimony? Someone who already read the book and applied the book and they got results. Who are you going to listen to? Are you going to listen to the person who actually did it, or are you going to pick up the book? As if the book or the 2D is more important than the 3D. Now, of course, you have the 2D as a reference, just in case you forget, just in case you want to add on to it, but you don't rely upon it. You pull it out, and that's why it's good to take notes. I would say everybody should be taking notes, especially if you are doing this type of work anyway. If every day you are experimenting with different aspects of your consciousness, of course you should take notes, because you're learning what each point of consciousness does to you on a personal level. So you are personalizing the language. So now you're not just a person who speaks the language is personalized by you. And when you have personalized the language, that's when you're able to produce different results of that language, which we call advancing your lingo. Now you're able to put things together that people are like, oh, that's pretty clever. How you put that together? You're able to put things together cleverly. Not because you know it, but because you have personalized it. You have customized it. Now you can customize it to make it work based on how you operate. Now you don't have to bend for the language. The language bends for you. You kind of have to bend into it when you are memorizing it, because you have to essentially learn the boundaries of what it is. But eventually those boundaries can be extended and expanded. So they are not set in stone. They are not definite. So we can say, 1 represents the sun, which represents individuality. It represents the self. It represents creativity. All of these things will be correct, but we know we can forever expand upon that. It's never limited to our definitions. However, we give it definitions just to be able to recognize it in the outer world. So this is what the definitions are for. Even though the definitions are not limited, we can continuously add on to it, because these are laws of nature. So what we call the occult is essentially laws, just like we have universal laws. So we don't even have to call it the language. It's actually laws that you can actually bend. So it's not just laws that you follow. The laws can be manipulated. but they have to be manipulated through your consciousness. It's not going to, that manipulation is not going to happen on a 2D. It's going to happen on a 3D. So essentially, you have to attune yourself to that frequency in order to learn that frequency and personalize it and see what you can actually do with it. It's not about what someone else can do with it. What can you do with it? So you can say you may be an Aquarius, but what can you do with the energy of Virgo when you decide to tap into that? Because you have access to Virgo. We have access to all 12 signs. Anybody with a natal chart, which is everybody, has access to all 12, even though certain degrees are highlighted. Meaning whatever your sun sign is, it's not even that the sign is highlighted, it's the actual degree. It's not even the entirety of the sign, it's the degree. So if your sun sign is 5 degrees Libra, for example, just saying that my sun is in Libra is not enough, because Libra is a full 30 degrees from 0 to 29. That's a whole 30 degrees. Your sun is just highlighting one of those 30 degrees. There's 29 other degrees that are not highlighted. So we must take that into consideration. We oversimplify it. Okay, my sun is in Libra, so I'm a Libra, and this is what a Libra is. A Libra has these attributes, so on and so forth. But what we're missing is each degree of the Libra. In this example, this will apply to any of the 360 degrees of the zodiac, but each of these degrees, you can say, are infinite. So just because we're looking at 360 degrees, each of these degrees can be expanded. So in the example of 5 degrees Libra, that's a whole consciousness in and of itself. So you can say Libra, even though it's 30 degrees, that's 30 different manifestations, 30 different possible manifestations. And within those 30 different manifestations, they all are infinite in their ability to expand. So this is why simply saying you can say Sun in Libra, that's, you're taking the whole entire 30 degrees and applying it to yourself, when you should actually be expanding your degrees, which are 22. We all have 22 degrees in our natal chart. You have 10 degrees for 10 planets, and we're just talking about the standard. Of course, you can add asteroids and all type of extra, but if we're just speaking on the foundation, the 10 planets, that's 10 degrees. Then you have the 10 house cusp, which are 12 degrees. The 10 and the 12 gives you 22. The 22 dimensions, the 22 paths, the 22 paths of Set, if we want to take it to the clip off. So essentially everybody has 22 points. Of the 360 degrees, everybody is dealing with 22 points, which can be forever built upon or expanded. You can take away and you can destroy. You can build and destroy within those degrees. That's why you can be in a room with someone who has the same sun sign as you, and there may be similarities, but of course you're going to notice that this person is different. And y'all can be there can be 1 degree difference, and that's enough. Even people with the same degrees, you still have minutes. And within those minutes, you have seconds. So you're never going to be exactly the same degree, minute, and second of someone else. So there's going to always be a variation. No matter how small of a variation, there will always be a variation. And the magic, you can say, occurs in the variation Not the foundation, the variation. The foundation is the same for us all. We can all tap into the occult. Everybody has access to it. The magic happens in the variation when you begin to realize, oh, the foundation can be expanded. Let me expand it in the way that makes sense to me, that I would expand. Let me apply my own creativity and make my own expansions based on my own personal experience with these particular degrees, with this particular science. What makes it possible to do all these things that I'm saying is because of the universal laws. Meaning the universal laws, once again, is the map that the experiment is playing out on. Meaning we know that all this is possible because we know the universal laws. That will be the measuring that we would do to determine if something is real or fake. Does it fit within the structure of the universal laws? The only way for us to know if it fits within the structure of the universal laws is to actually know what the laws are. Because once you know what the laws are, it provides for you a map for you to then determine or make your discernment as to what direction you should move in and where you should go and how you should take information in and how you should project information out. All this will be based on the map that you're looking at, the universal code. So the first law is a law of mentalism. That lets you know everything is mind, not 75%, not 85%, 100% of reality is mental. That means whenever you want to produce change, it must be through your mental force. Because this is a mental experience. The physical is a part of the mental, but the physical comes after. Because if we're looking at divine order, the physical will come after. You can say that would be cause and effect. Cause and effect is the seventh law. So it is a part of the universal law. But in order to understand the effect, we must understand the cause, which is the previous 6 laws. Once we get to the 7th law, then you can say, manifest the material plane. So the other previous 6 laws is what explains the cause, so that we understand the effect. But we're not going to understand the effect if we think that the effect is the cause. Because the universal laws tell us that that is not the case. You have a law of causality, or the law of cause and effect. Everything has a reaction. Every act has a reaction. So that means nothing just happens haphazardly. Nothing just happens on its own. Some type of consciousness created movement or motion. An atom had to have intelligence to be able to combine with similar atoms and to produce or project a shape, a sacred geometrical shape, because we are sacred geometry. That's why we have 5 points: the arm, the leg, the arm, leg, arm, head, basically, right? The Allah. Everybody is that. That's sacred geometry, the 5 points. Everybody is a star, okay, because a star has 5 points. That means we're all sacred geometry. That's not just haphazard. That is because of a cause. There's a reason we have 5 points and not 4 or 6. Meaning that 5 had to be based on exactness. That could not be a mistake. It had to be 5, because if it was 4 or 6, it would not be perfection. The second law would then be correspondence. As above, so below. So now that we understand that everything is mental, as above, so below, this lets us know that there is a correspondence that is occurring upwardly that then produces vibrations downwardly. So we translate that to what's going on in your thoughts, what's going on in your consciousness will reflect in your physicality. So just because, as I was speaking about earlier, just because these things are invisible to your sight and inaudible to your ear, it doesn't make it, you can say, powerless. It is actually very powerful, because we know the first universal law, everything is mental. So that shows you the power of thought, which you can't see, which you can't hear, but it still has supreme power. Your mental force is very powerful. And then this mental force corresponds to your physicality, which we will call synchronicity. Meaning you see something in a dream. Let's just say you see a person in a dream and then you actually see this person in real life. It's going to hit different because you saw them in a dream versus if you actually just saw them in real time. Because to you, that would be a synchronistic moment. Like, yo, I just saw you in a dream. Or I just saw this symbol. Let's just say you saw a symbol in a dream and somehow you run into this symbol when you are awake. It's going to hit different. It's synchronistic. Now, like, oh, I actually saw this in a dream. So you see, reality becomes absolutely different when we are able to recognize the synchronicity. Because you're going to know that, well, there's some type of connection here. There's some type of reason why I'm seeing these things or hearing these things. It can be something you see, something you hear, or a feeling. All of these things are relevant. So this takes us to correspondence. Your ability to correspond things. This is why dreams are important. So the first law lets us know the importance of mental force, then the second law lets us know the importance of dreams. The importance of visualization. Being able to tap into those upper and those lower worlds. And begin to produce synchronicities. All this is taking place within the consciousness. Which then takes us to the law of vibration. Everything is in motion. Nothing is stagnant. So everything that appears to be still is actually moving. You just can't detect its movement. You can look at a rock, you can say, well, this rock isn't moving. No, it's just that you can't detect the movement of the rock. The rock is moving so fast that you can't detect the movement. No, it's not that it's moving fast. It's vibrating at a level that we can't perceive the movements. We can't perceive the motion. But it's happening nonetheless. And that goes for all matter. So all matter essentially is living. If something is vibrating, that means it is living. So now we understand all matter is alive. And matter is not just the 3D matter, but also the invisible matter that we call the dark matter. So it's not just the tangible matter, it's also the dark matter, which we know that's where thoughts come in. Thought travels through dark matter. So because everything is living, that means this is where we get the idea of we are all connected to each other. We are all connected because we are all composed of the same matter, which we will call carbon. But we know carbon, well, if we are into chemistry, carbon has many different forms or variations, and that's when you begin to get into the more expansive thinking. Meaning now we're not just going by carbon, because we can say 666 takes you to carbon, but carbon has many different variations. And it is within those variations that we begin to see how carbon actually works. But you see, those are the type of conversations that we don't usually have, because we will have to have some type of knowledge of chemistry. And this is why I was saying earlier, the type of people that have that type of knowledge are not necessarily communicating with people that have occult knowledge to be able to make these connections, because we need to be able to make these connections because we're talking about the same thing. We're just using a different language. When we are able to merge the languages, it creates a new language or a new frequency within that language, which will produce different results. So meaning it's not enough to use the scientific language. It's not enough to use the spiritual language. It must be a combination of both, because that would make us universal. We're not universal if we're not scientific, and we're not universal if we are not spiritual or Eastern. Basically, the difference between the Eastern language and the Western language. The Western language is based on science, while the Eastern language is more mystic, it's more poetic. But there is a common denominator. And it is within this common denominator that things become alive or living, which again takes us to vibration. If everything is living, that means everything could be manipulated. That's why we can take materials of the earth and create iPhones, create computers, create technology from natural resources. That's because of the law of vibration. Those resources are alive. Those resources are living. That's why we have cultures that are based on nature. Tree spirits, water spirits, lake spirits, river spirits, fire spirits, earth spirits, gnomes, elementals, mermaids. These are all based on living elements. The law of vibration that takes us to the elements. These elements are living, meaning these elements have a spirit. If these elements have a spirit, that means these elements are spiritual. If these elements are spiritual, that means that they are intelligent. If these elements are intelligent, that means you can interact with them. And if you can interact with them, that will make it elemental, which is where people get all these elementals from, because you can actually interact with the elements because it is a living, animated intelligence because of the law of vibration. You can interact with the elements. Then we go to the law of polarity. which means everything has a positive charge and a negative charge working together as one. So if we utilize everything that we have just learned from these previous 3 laws, not only is everything alive, everything has a positive and negative charge. Everything essentially has a north and a south pole. Every atom has electrons as well as protons. So within every atom, you have a positive and a negative charge. And if everything is composed of atoms, that means that applies to everything. So that means the law of polarity exists within atoms. So that's the whole science of atoms, essentially, which we have come to discover, you see, with the scientific language. So we can call it atoms now. But before we had the word atom, there was a word for that in the occult. And there was a word for that in the ancient tongue, whatever ancient tongue. All ancient languages had words for all of these scientific terms that we have come up with. We have already had words for this. We already have vibrations. However, because of those languages are, you can say, no longer living, the languages live through what we now call atom. So essentially, we may not know the ancient word for these. Well, of course, it depends on what ancient language. Some ancient languages are living, some are not. But what we know is, if we say atom, they say something else. And whatever they say for the word atom, with the past, present, or future, it's going to take you to deeper chambers. In other words, what we say is atom for them will be something that indicates polarity. Whatever word that they use, when you look at how that word is formed, that word will have to have been formed on the law of polarity. So when describing an atom, of course, how can you describe an atom without describing the positive and negative charge, essentially? So when you are describing an atom, you have to describe it in terms of polarity. There's no other way to describe an atom without acknowledging its polarity. So whatever word for atom, it had to indicate some type of polarity. So what does this polarity mean? So we understand the polarity is there, but what does it cause? That's why we have terms such as feminine and masculine. They are opposites. You can say the masculine produces heat, while the feminine produces coolness. If the masculine produces air, then the feminine will produce earth. So every atom has the law of polarity in there. So there we go. We know that law to be true because we need to look no further than the actual atom itself to prove that the law of polarity, they were on to something when they came up with this law. It's not that they came up with it. They just looked into the universe and saw that there are patterns that we see on all levels. From the smallest to the largest level, you're going to find polarity. And that's what makes it universal laws. These laws are applied on the smallest degrees to the largest degrees. So the previous law took us to vibration, which let us know that everything is living. So not only is everything living, everything has a negative and positive charge, a masculine and a feminine charge. The masculine and the feminine charge is based on the breath. Meaning there are differences in what we call Enda and Pingala. If we go into the Kundalini science, you have Enda, you have Pingala. One is masculine charged, one is feminine charged. So that means we know that the energy that we absorb out of the atmosphere, we're not just breathing in oxygen, we're also breathing in a positive charge and a negative charge. One charge heats up the body, which helps you to digest, which helps you to stay warm, while the cool or the feminine charge helps the waters to move in the body, helps us to go inside ourselves and do all things spiritual. So basically, you can say the masculine helps you to do outer things, worldly things, while the feminine helps you to do spiritual things. And we all have this polarity. And this polarity or this energy is living. It has a intelligence. So what does that mean? That means every atom, not only does it have a positive and negative charge, every atom is intelligent. That means every atom has the ability to think. Every atom has consciousness. Well, we know that to be true because our bodies are composed of cells, and all of these cells have the ability to think. That means that they are intelligent. They are thinking beings, intelligent beings, because they are vibrating. They have intelligence. If you have vibration, you have intelligence. If you have intelligence, you have the ability to interact, the ability to think. So those are the four laws, the four universal laws, which takes us to the fifth, which is a law of rhythm. The law of rhythm introduces us to cycles. Everything has a beginning, middle, and end. What goes up must come down. The law of rhythm. Cycles. Yugas, as we call ages. That's why you have the old age, you have the new age. Old Testament, New Testament. Age of Pisces, age of Aquarius. So we know that to be true because that proves it right there. We are in the age of information. We are in the cycle of information. We was not always in the age of information, but we are in it now. So we know that this 26,000 year cycle, we know this because of astrology. So this law of rhythm, this law of ages, going through themes, going through the constellations. So we know this to be true because of astronomy and astrology. The planets are going through the constellations that we call the zodiac. That's happening on a daily basis. There are cycles, which takes us to the third title, Planetary Retrogrades. Because currently, Saturn is retrograde. Not only Saturn became retrograde June 4th. So basically about a month ago. Saturn has been retrograde for the last month. So if things have been kind of extra challenging in terms of, in your worldly dimensions, anything connected to Saturn, because Saturn is now moving backwards. And it has been moving backwards for the last 30 days. So if you have noticed a shift in the last 30 days, that shift was because of Saturn. Saturn is now in its spiritual state. Whenever we're talking about a retrograde, that means the planet is cleansing itself. The planet is essentially going through its karmic cleansing. So the planet is moving backwards. That means it's cleansing its karma. So even the planets have to cleanse their karma. Not every planet goes retrograde, but most of them do. So in this case, when the planet is in retrograde, that represents its karmic cleanse. So when I say a planet is going through its spiritual, it's going through a karmic cleanse. So whenever we, for example, have a Mercury retrograde, and Mercury retrograde produces all these interruptions, all these delays in travel, so on and so forth. It's not the best time to close deals, so on and so forth. The reason that is because when Mercury is going through a karmic cleanse, Mercury is not trying to add more karma to itself while it is cleansing. So essentially, you can say Mercury is not off duty, because obviously people will continue to do business, people will continue to travel. It may be delays, but the motion is moving, but the motion is now going slower. Now it takes a little longer for transactions to go through. Now it takes a little longer to go or to get to your destination. Now things are moving, but it's taking a lot longer. Things are taking a lot longer because while Mercury is going through its karmic cleanse, as we know, all of the planets affect us as well. That's why we can see these things in real time. So even because of the law of correspondence, a previous law, so just because Mercury is retrograde in the sky, it ain't just staying there. Because of correspondence, we're going to see the effects down here. We know that because of the universal law. And because of the first law, the law of mentalism, it's not going to necessarily be a physical thing. Mercury may not necessarily be affecting us on a physical level. Mercury is not directly affecting you, but it is affecting your mental plane, because everything is mental. So you see, we can always refer back to these universal laws to know whether something is legit or not. So because of the first universal law, the law of mentalism, we know that everything will affect us on a mental level. All things affect us mentally. The spiritual, or not the spiritual, the physical effects may not come till later on. But once we have physical results, the mental activity has already been taking place long before. So the first universal law lets us know everything is mental. Second universal law, correspondence, as above, so below. Everything will have a mental effect. Everything happening in the stars and the cosmos will have an effect on your consciousness. Then when we go to vibration and polarity, everything is living and everything has a dual nature. Now this lets us know that just because a planet is in retrograde, there is still good that can come from it. Because nothing is just purely bad. Because of the law of polarity, that means nothing is fully bad or nothing is fully negative. Because there's always positivity that can be tapped into. Even so, any negative situation that's good, and that means every positive situation also has bad in it. So anything we look at as positive has bad. Everything we look at as negative has good. That's because of the law of polarity. So that means nothing is fully positive or negative. Everything has a bit of both. Because of the intelligence of atoms. So because of the intelligence of atoms, everything will have a option, you can say, to go in the negative route or the positive route. So even when I say negative, negative is not what we think it is, as in negative is not bad. Because the feminine currency, of course, we know isn't bad. And that doesn't make the masculine currency good. Of course, in a patriarchal society, that's probably how they would think. But we know that this is not the case. So that's why I really don't even like to use it in that way, because to say something is negative, that means it is femininely, it is charged with the feminine currency, rather. I'll say it that way. Which is not a bad thing. Just because something is charged with the masculine force doesn't necessarily make it a good thing. Because everything has a balance of both. Everybody has a pH level. Everybody has a hormonal level. We all have it. These levels. pH level, hormonal level. We're constantly balancing these polarities within our own body, within our own consciousness. So really, it's about the balance. This is where I'm getting at with this. Meaning, if something can have 50% of the masculine charge and 50% of the feminine charge, then it's good to go, because that's how it should be. Nothing should be fully positive or fully negative. So when we think in absolute terms, because we have been trained to think in absolutist terms, you either with us or against us. You're either friend or foe. You see this, we've been trained to think like this. But you see, according to the universal laws, everything has a positive and negative charge. That means, okay, well, there's really no such thing as a positive or negative event at all. It's really about your perception of such a thing. So no act is fully positive or negative. Everything has a taste of both. Meaning, so that means we have an opportunity to either tap into. And again, it's like, I don't even want to say the positive side of things, because that just means the masculine side. But the masculine side isn't just because it's positive don't mean it's good. Just because it's negative don't mean it's bad. So I'm trying to refrain from using it in these terms. Even though we've been trained to do this, but I'm like, we got to go beyond that. Just because something is positive don't make it good. Just because something is negative don't make it bad. Everything has a taste of them both. So we have the opportunity to see the polarity in all things. That will be the goal. Do you see the polarity in all things? Can you see that all good acts are not necessarily good for everybody? All bad acts is not necessarily good for or bad for everybody. Can you see both sides? Which makes you neutral, which is where you should remain, neutral. Because if you're on one side or the other side, now you're thinking like an absolutist, you're missing the point. We are not to be absolutists, we are to be neutral. To be able to see both sides. Because that's just a reality. Do you see the positive charge of a situation, and do you see the negative charge of a situation? Because that's in all situations. Every situation has a positive charge and a negative charge. And as long as it's positive and this negative charge is getting along, all is well. It's only when it becomes imbalanced, it becomes too negative or it becomes too positive, that's is what creates an imbalance. So what we really should be seeking is balance between the poles, because when the poles are not balanced, it creates an imbalance. So it's not about being fully positive or negative, it's about maintaining the balance. And when the balance is off, you feel imbalanced. You will feel like you're not balanced. And you see that actually is an indication of your health. They say people that can't stand on one foot, I think it takes 10 years off of your life. If you can't balance on one toe, not one toe, 1 foot. If you can't balance on 1 foot, they say it takes 10 years off your life. Meaning balance adds 10 years to your life. It's just your ability to maintain your balance gives you an extra 10 years of life. So whatever age you're going to live to, you're going to get 10 plus years if you maintain your balance. It doesn't matter how positive or negative you are. You can be the most negative person on earth. You can be the most positive person on earth. If you have balance, you're going to get an extra 10 years. It doesn't matter that one person is negative, one person is positive. If you're able to maintain balance, then honestly, the negative person would actually become more positive, and the overly positive person will become more worldly, you can say. It actually would be beneficial for both of those types of people as we are beginning to see why this is relevant. So going back to the fifth universal law of rhythm, we know that this is true because of the ages, which then leaves us with the final two. Before causality, we have the law of gender. The law of gender now lets us know that everything, even though everything has a positive and negative charge, the outward manifestation of a thing will either be masculine or feminine. So what this means is, while we are balancing both poles within us, we will outwardly manifest in a masculine or a feminine form. So we can either be born in a feminine or a masculine form. So now we're talking about the physicality of things. Something is either the masculine charge is dominant or the feminine charge is dominant within every human being, due to the law of gender. So due to the law of gender, a person will prefer their masculine side or their feminine side. That's what determines a person's focus. So the law of gender is why, again, a man will focus on his masculinity or a man will focus on his feminine principle. That's going to be based on the law of gender. So it's not just about your actual physical gender, it's also about your consciousness A woman can be focused on her feminine form or her masculine, depending on gender, which is not just the physical, it's also the consciousness. That's why you have masculine women and you have feminine women. You have masculine men, you have feminine men. And you have people in between these worlds. Because we're not just speaking about the physical gender, we're talking about the state of consciousness. So once we go to the previous law, meaning everything has a positive or negative charge, that means anybody can manifest between these two poles. So that's why it's not for us to be extremists. Well, someone has to be fully masculine, somebody has to be fully feminine. That's a constraint we try to put on to our consciousness. You have to clearly indicate whether you're masculine or clearly indicate whether you're feminine. We try to constrain ourselves into that, but we see the universal laws lets us know that, okay, well, anybody can manifest between these two poles. They may be 75% feminine, 25% masculine. Anybody can manifest between these poles. Because now that you know that these poles exist, you know that, okay, anybody can come between these poles, anywhere in between. That's up to them in their own consciousness due to the law of gender. The law of gender is what determines, you can say, your percentage of feminine focus and your percentage of masculine focus. So your percentage within your consciousness of focus, this is based on the law of gender. That determines where your consciousness falls, which then takes us to the law of causality. Everything has a cause and no effect, which we understand clearly now because we understand the previous 6 laws. So the 7th law just lets us know that, okay, based on everything that has just occurred, everything that has just been explained, all of that will produce a result, a physical result, a result that some type of result in matter, some type of carbon result. All these previous 6 laws cause this carbon to be more dense. It causes something intangible, something that just existed within the consciousness, to become now tangible. So we see the universal laws can be used to explain anything. I'm just using it in this example to explain the occult, but it can be used to explain anything. So we see how everything fits right into these laws. We don't have to try to bend the laws. We don't have to make them more than they are. We don't have to take away from it. We can simply, everything just falls right into place. Once we understand the map that we're in, once we understand the universe that we are in. So you see, everything just becomes like, okay, well, you see how anything that you consider occult falls into those universal laws. Because in astrology, you're taught about mentalism, meaning you're taught that, okay, these planets have an effect on your consciousness. This is what determines your conscious state. Correspondence. This conscious state will determine your outward appearance, your physicality. It will have results. In the material plane, what happens on the astral plane will have results on the physical plane. So we already know that in astrology. That's why we use astrology to predict events that will occur. So that's how we are able to predict, as well as go back in time and look at previous cycles to see, okay, let's see when this particular cycle happened before and what were those results, so that we can kind of have an idea of what will happen. That's due to correspondence. Vibration, everything is living. That's why we have progress charts, meaning you have your natal chart, but your natal chart is always progressing in the future. Because the vibration isn't stagnant, it's always moving. So that's the whole art of a progress chart, of solar returns, of lunar returns. That's vibration. Then we have polarity. Every planet doesn't get along with every other planet. That's why you have aspects. Some aspects are positive, but some aspects are not positive, as we call negative. But again, we're trying to stay away from this absolutist thinking. All aspects are neutral. It's what you make of it. So just because there's a square, you can say, which is supposed to be negative, it doesn't have to be negative for you if you see both sides of it. So that's why we don't have to look at none of these features as positive or negative. It's all about how you decide to look at it. It can be negative for one person, but it doesn't have to be negative for you, depending on how you choose to perceive it. So polarity means every planet don't get along with each other. Some planets are favorable, but some planets are not. That's just the law of polarity. Because of their charges, some planets don't work well together. And because of their charges, some planets do work well together. It's the same with people. Depending on the type of people that you put together, sometimes it'll work, sometimes it won't. It's going to be based on their particular individual charge and how it corresponds with others. Which then takes us to the law of rhythm, which we already know as the cycles, which we know as the retrogrades. When does a person's retrogrades occur? So we're always looking at cycles in astrology to, again, whether we're looking at cycles that have happened before or cycles that will happen, to make a determination or a prediction as to how this will affect your consciousness. So the law of rhythm is our ability to go into the past and look at these same cycles, and also look into the future as to where they will happen again and make a determination as to what that will mean. We go in the past, okay, we went in the past to see when these cycles occurred and what happened as a result. So we're going to go into the future and see when these cycles are going to happen again and make a determination as to what could possibly happen, because we have saw this before because of the law of rhythm. We have saw this occur before. So now that it's happening again, we kind of have an idea of how this energy will manifest, because we did our due diligence. We activated the law of rhythm, which then takes us to the law of gender. And this lets us know that just because you may have a sun sign, that may not be the dominant part of your chart. For example, you may have a planet that's stronger than your sun. Basically, unless your sun is in Aries, or unless your sun is in Leo, which are the highest points of the sun, you probably have a planet in your natal chart that's stronger than the sun. So you can say that planet will actually have a more dominant effect in your life than your sun sign, because that planet is just simply more powerful. And again, we don't have to use terms as strong or weak or more powerful. This is just based on rhythm. It's about a cycle. When a planet is at its peak, it's more powerful in terms of it's in its natural state. So when I say powerful, this just means that the planet is in its natural state. And then when a planet is at its unnatural state, we will consider it weak. So it's just a difference between somebody feeling like they're at home versus somebody feeling like they're behind enemy lines, you can say. That's the only difference. So some of your planets, you feel like you're at home, you're in your natural state, while other planets, you feel like you're behind enemy lines. So again, we don't have to use this strong or weak. This just determines the type of consciousness that's produced in your planets. That's the law of gender. This lets you know either you're going to feel at home, or you're going to feel like you're behind enemy lines, or you're going to feel the energy of neutrality. This is based on the law of gender. Then lastly, the law of causality. Everything that has happened before will produce what we call karma. All of this previous energy will produce a karmic effect, whether we say good karma or bad karma. And again, we don't have to use terms good and bad. Just some karma has residue, some karma does not. So some acts have karmic residue, some acts do not have karmic residue. Karmic residue is just attachment, because karma is based on attachment. Things that you are, people, places, things that you are attached to. So you can say karmic acts that leave residue is when you're unwilling to let go of a thing when it's time to let go of it. It produces karma because the energy was meant to be released, but you held on to it, and that's what makes something toxic. We can say, we use these phrases now. So what we call toxic is karmic. In the East, they call it karma. In the West, we call it toxic. You see how these words, they already exist, but you see we don't have the conversations with the same people. We don't have conversations with people that think different than us, so we can make these connections. So a so-called toxic environment, relationship, event, person, place, or thing is based on karma. So if something is feeling toxic, or it means that it is karmic, it is past its due. You're still holding on to something that's past its due, so it creates a toxic situation. That toxicity is based on karma. So when you act and you have intentions that are void of expectation, you're not doing things and expecting something back, basically. When you do something and you expect something back, if you don't receive what you expect back, it produces, you can say, a negative response within you. And again, I don't want to say negative. It produces a response within you that's unfavorable. However, when you perform an act or you have an intention without expectation or without expecting a particular result, that means whatever happens, you accept it. You are neutral, which is what we are striving towards. All of your intentions and all of your acts essentially should be neutral. Anytime you're doing something and expecting something in return, whenever you don't get what you expect, it's going to produce unfavorable sensations within you, which would then lead to situations that are more unfavorable, and it just builds up. Versus when you have no expectations, you're fine with whatever results that occur. And this is essentially what we do when we are experimenting with this occult language, with these frequencies, with this energy. We're not doing it expecting a result. We are allowing whatever to happen to happen. This is what it means to be pure of heart, or to be childlike. You are allowing the results, whatever they may be. You are neutral. Whatever happens, happens. You remain neutral in the result. So whether it's positive or negative or in between, you're fine with it, as long as you are getting the results. So whether the results are what you thought it would be or what you didn't think it would be, you are getting the results and you are remaining neutral. And that's what makes us the scientists. You have to have the mind of a scientist, because this is how a scientist approaches experiments within a laboratory setting. They don't have their emotions connected with their experiments. They are neutral. Let's say, well, whatever happens, happens. We're just here to observe what happens and to see how far we can push it. Can you cause a different reaction? So on and so forth. What happens when you combine this and this and this? You're just experimenting, but you're not emotionally attached to, well, if this doesn't work, well, it upsets you. Well, if this doesn't work, well, it just doesn't work. We're going to try something else. So the same mentality a scientist has performing experiments, we have to approach life in the same way. And that's how we produce, you can say, karma that doesn't leave residue, which leads to a more fulfilling life overall, because you're open to the spontaneity of life. Life is spontaneous and miraculous and, unpredictable, as they say. You allow yourself to be at home with the unpredictability because you understand the universal laws. And again, I'm just applying it to astrology, but you can apply it to any science and you're going to come with the same results. You're going to come to the same results, essentially. And you're doing all this for the purposes of advancing your lingo. Once you have an internal understanding of a thing, the true essence of a thing, then you can manipulate that thing in ways that other people didn't think about. Because you understand the internal workings of a thing. Now you can utilize it in a way that wasn't expected, which is what we are supposed to be doing here. Learning to utilize things in ways that they were not expected to be used. That's what makes a person innovative. That's what makes a person inventive. When they start using things in ways that they were not expected to be used. Everything has an expected use. Okay, you're going to use this phone to make calls and text messages. Nobody realized, okay, you can use this phone to hack into servers and cause disruptions. You can do that too. But that wasn't necessarily its expected use. Somebody just figured out how to do it. They just utilized the same components that were already in the phone, and they learned how to access the components and rewire the charge so that it produces a different result. So that's what I mean by advancing your lingo, learning how to customize your words. Because you understand internally what you're actually saying. Because it's coming from a personalized experience or a customized experience, because you are conducting experiments in the laboratory of life. If you're not conducting experiments, you're going to feel stagnant. You're going to feel like you're not moving. You must always be conducting some type of experiment. Casting some type of lot, throwing some type of dice, putting yourself in situations that cause you to learn more about who and what you are, not just outwardly, but also inwardly. And not just learning about yourself, learning how to do things that just was not expected for you to know how to do. That's what makes somebody a star, or that's what makes somebody famous. You realize that, oh, I can actually do this, and I didn't realize I can do it. Let me do it this way. So, for example, if you were like a short person and you learn how to do things that tall people do, just differently, You're learning to do things that you're not supposed to know how to do or be capable of doing. But you figured out a way to be capable of doing things that tall people do when you're short. So it's like it doesn't matter to you. You actually learn how to have an advantage. That will be a result of innovation. You have evened the playing field. You have learned how to use a phone or a computer. Everybody has access to a phone. But it's how you use the phone that determines its value to you. Because through the phone, we can access various dimensions. There's really nothing you can't do with a cell phone at this point because we call it smartphones. We call it smartphones because we're saying that the phone has an intelligence behind it. The phone can think. That's why we call them smartphones. It has an intelligence. It is thinking. You can ask your phone a question and it's going to give you an answer. You can type in a question, it's going to give you an answer, which is why I was speaking about Google before. Then if you have an iPhone, you have Siri. So on and so forth. The phones are now intelligent. You can feed it information and it feeds you a result back. So now the phone is intelligent, which also means it has a consciousness. That's why recently in the news, we've been hearing about Google and the AI coming to life. One of the engineers feel like one of the artificial intelligence are coming to life. It is sentient. It is a sentient being. Artificial intelligence is now a sentient being. This is where I'm going here. If something is intelligent, if something has the ability to think, that means it has the ability to be sentient. So essentially what you're doing is making your phone sentient, making your computer sentient, making your altar sentient. Whatever tool you use to tap into the magical force, you're making it sentient. You're making your spells sentient. Whatever you do, whatever your spiritual form is, you're making it sentient. That's why it must be memorized, because you're bringing it into the 3D world. So the language becomes sentient. It becomes living. Something dead now is giving life, giving new life. You caused it to be resurrected. What makes it a cult is it is hidden. You can say it's dead. This is a dead language. You must give it new life. It only has life through your consciousness. You have to acknowledge it. Once you acknowledge it, the intelligence becomes alive from within you. And from within you, you can produce or project an image outside of your consciousness to be reflected back to you. Because consciousness is the only reality. So the only thing we can do is project our consciousness out to reflect to us. Like staring into a crystal ball. This is what divination is. This is what doing a tarot reading is. You're projecting an image to be reflected back at you, and you're analyzing that reflection. So, I think we get the point here. And of course, all this was in real time. No notes were taken, no references. Wasn't looking up anything. I didn't utilize Google. All this is straight from memory. So I want to end with this. Neptune recently went retrograde the 27th of June. So about 5 days ago. So not only are we dealing with the Saturn retrograde, we're also dealing with a Neptune retrograde, as Pluto has already been retrograde. And I also believe Jupiter is retrograde. I'm going to check that. So now I'm picking up the phone and I'm looking at the chart because I want to verify that. So I don't want to say anything that's not true. So let me verify, right? Okay. So no, we do not have a Jupiter retrograde. What we do have is a Saturn retrograde, a Neptune retrograde, and a Pluto retrograde. That's why I was thinking about Jupiter, because I took notes. Now I'm looking at my notes. I was thinking about Jupiter because Jupiter does go retrograde the 28th of this month. July 28th, Jupiter does go retrograde. So that's why I was thinking about Jupiter. Then, August 24th, Uranus goes retrograde. Then, September 9th, Mercury goes retrograde. So you see, like every month, we're having a retrograde. Saturn and Neptune went retrograde in June. June 4th for Saturn, June 28th for Neptune. Jupiter then goes retrograde July 28th. Uranus August 24th, then Mercury September 9th. And then Mercury will be retrograde, of course, for the 3 weeks, so on and so forth. So we're coming into the time of the year. That's why they call these, Jason months. In the occult world, they call, July, August, September, October, and November. They call this the Jason months because this is the time where the most occult workings are occurring. Well, now we know why. So instead of us just leaving it there, like a lot of people do, they take us into all that devil worship and all this, and they tell us what's going on, but we don't get the science behind it. Well, what are they doing it for? What is so special about the Jason months? Well, now we know. It's because this is when we have these 6 planet retrogrades happening in the Jason months. We got all this retrograde energy going on. So you see this retrograde energy is just building up, and it builds up like this during the Jason months. So now, instead of it just being left there, in the devil's land, now you can take the information and do what you want to do with it. What are you going to do while we're building up to this 6 planet retrograde? What energy are you going to project? Whether positive, negative, or neutral is completely up to your consciousness. And with that, I bear peace. 93, 93, 93.